Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This is the newest Marvel film. Do I really need to give an introduction? It's the origin story of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's newest hero. I've done like 8 takes for this review, and I just can't seem to articulate what I did and didn't like, and a big reason for that is because I love the MCU, and I think that there's things about this movie that are really admirable. I like the way this movie's directed. I think it looks good. I don't know when this started, but I feel like maybe with the first Guardians of the Galaxy, but especially since Thor Ragnarok, Marvel's done a much better job of allowing their director's style to kind of shine through. I like the way it looks. Has a good color scheme. I like the cinematography. I'll talk more about the choreography of the fight scenes here in just a second, but it's a good looking movie, and if they're going to make a sequel to this, which I'm sure they will, I'll bring back the same director because I think the movie looks good. All these actors are very earnest. None of these performances are bad. They all serve the script. I brought up earlier the fight scenes, and let's just talk about that because there's been a lot of hype surrounding the martial arts sequences in this movie, and yeah, believe the hype. There's 2 fight sequences, but especially one. There's one at the end of the first act on the side of a building that they don't really show much of in the trailer. That is, dude, it takes your breath away. It's a top 5 MCU fight sequence ever, and I love Marvel. I love Marvel movies, but outside of the films the Russo brothers directed, and maybe the first Avengers, and I'm sure there's an exception here or there, the action in the MCU is pretty bland. It's not terrible, it's not ugly, it's not poorly shot. It works because you care about the characters in them, but for the most part, there's not a whole lot of really memorable action sequences in the MCU. Here, that changes. I mean, there's 2 in the first act of this movie that are like staggering. I mean, there's a few punches that get landed that make you go, whoa, they're well shot. The choreography is great. I mean, they really... It says a lot about Marvel that this deep in the game, 13 years since the first Iron Man came out, they're still finding ways to do things that are new, and I think that some of the fight sequences in this movie are just amazing. Okay, I've said what I've liked. Now let's kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. I don't like this movie. Not only do I not like this movie, I think that this is a bad movie, like straight up. And there's a difference there, because like James Gunn's The Suicide Squad was a movie that didn't particularly work for me, but I understand why people loved it. For me, it was a superhero comedy that didn't totally work because I felt like the comedy it didn't make me laugh. But I understand why people loved it. Here, I am surprised that this movie is getting as much of a pass as it's been getting because a lot of it did not work for me. Now, before I go any further, let me say, I love the MCU. I love fans of the MCU, and there are people on YouTube and people on the internet who love trashing these movies, who love trashing things that people enjoy, and who love hating on this universe. I'm not that guy. Boy, I was there on May 4th, 2008 when I was 12 years old sitting in the theater watching the first Iron Man. I love this universe. I just don't like this movie. Many of the things that work about most Marvel movies just don't work here. If you cut off 3 of my fingers, I could still count on one hand the amount of times that I laughed in this movie. I think there's really bad punch-up dialogue. There's really bad improv. Awkwafina is in this movie a ton, and she's just not funny. I think she's funny, like, as a person. Her character is not funny. One thing Marvel's great at is callbacks to other events in the MCU, and here, they bring back, I'm not going to spoil who, though, I mean, it's not really, it's a poorly kept secret. They bring back some characters that, like, are some of my least favorite in the MCU. One of them especially has, like, a big part in this, and I was just saying, why? Of all the characters you could have brought back, why this character? Everyone hates this character, and he's not good in this movie. But the biggest problem I have with this movie, and it's an issue that I don't think has plagued any other Marvel film, even Marvel films that I don't like, it's really poorly paced. I mean, I brought up the fight sequence at the end of the first act. That's a great sequence. It really is. It's an amazing fight scene. And then you get to a second act. Had I have been in the theater watching this thing alone, I would have yelled at the screen, "Cut the film!" This is the first time in a decade and a half that I've made this comparison. The character development in this movie is reminiscent to me of the Star Wars prequels, where it's like, yes, the characters are fleshed out, but the scenes in which they explain the characters' backstories are so boring and so poorly filmed and just not immersive or interesting, and they're poorly written. There's so much exposition in this movie that just doesn't work. Now, I was willing to live with that because I wanted to get to the third act, because my hope was that by the time we got to the third act, we would see some really cool martial arts sequences that we did not see in the second act, but that we saw in the first act that really kind of carried this thing. And you get to the final battle, and it bored the hell out of me. And it's a problem that I've brought up since the beginning, since Avengers Endgame. Well, you go back and watch my Spider-Man Far From Home review. I talked about this. The fact is, the final battle at the end of Avengers Endgame is, whether you like those movies or not, it's the biggest moment in movie history. And that final sequence, the last hour of that movie, it's perfect. It's chef's kiss. All the action is well shot. It's immersive. You care about the characters. It's emotional. They land every punch that they possibly could have landed. Now, going forward, you can't top that. I don't care how much you care about a character. You can't go bigger than that. You can't go better than that. And my hope was that in the final sequence of this movie, we'd see some really good hand-to-hand combat. I felt like, okay, maybe they might go a little bit smaller here. And you know what? It's another big, dumb, loud CGI battle. And it doesn't work. It bored me to tears. I have never done this. I almost walked out. Really, the last 5-10 minutes, I almost walked out of the movie because I'm like, you are dragging this thing on. Oh my God, just keeps going and going. And you know what? Some people are going to dig that. And some people are going to love these characters and they're going to be immersed in the action. That's fine. But I was watching this saying, I have seen this done not just better, I've seen this done substantially better recently. And I think that it's a problem that the MCU has run into since Endgame came out. The final sequence to Spider-Man Far From Home isn't terrible. It's not as good as Endgame. You watch all the TV shows they've put out, they've suffered from the same problem. Black Widow's third act, same problem here, same problem. And it speaks to something that I'm worried about going forward. And that's that for 11 years, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was the top dog in town. And in many ways, it still is. But those were stories that really felt like they needed to be told. Watching this and watching the TV shows they've put out and watching Black Widow, they feel like stories that want to be told, not necessarily stories that need to be told. I would be lying to you if I said that I didn't care less about this universe than I did 2 years ago. And a big reason for that is because so many arcs got wrapped up in Avengers Endgame that now it just feels like all they've done is make epilogues to that story. And now Spider-Man Far From Home will be a great barometer where if that movie doesn't work, then I might just be out on the MCU entirely. And again, I need to stress, this is not a terrible movie. There's many things about it that look good. It's not some awful like disgrace to cinema. But for a universe that I have cared so much about for over a decade, I find myself with each subsequent piece of media that they put out just caring less about the characters and caring less about the universe. I'm giving this movie a 5 out of 10. I got to erase that board. It's kind of smudged and it's kind of a mess. But yeah, it just didn't do much for me. I'm glad people are enjoying it. I think it's going to be a big hit. And there's nothing about the character of Shang-Chi that makes me not want to see him anymore. Captain Marvel was the one character where I saw her movie and I'm like, I don't need to see any more Carol Danvers. I want to see what happens to Shang-Chi going forward. But this movie as a whole just didn't do a whole lot for me. So yeah, I'm sure the torches and pitchforks are going to come out because I had an opinion that's different from most people. That's fine, whatever. But yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. While you're at it, hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.